there still doesn't. We have a book that's coming out alongside the film that I think is very well researched and really fascinating.
I was sent the script, was completely overwhelmed and very eager to be involved. I met the casting agent and I faxed Todd because I heard that he was eager to cast it, but I was in another country and I couldn't get to see him. So I wrote him a very passionate and hopefully clarifying letter about why I had to be in this film. And he waited to see me. So I went and I met him and did a couple of auditions and then went back to Australia and waited with my everything crossed, waiting to hear. And finally found out that I got the job.
I was making this film in Los Angeles, and I got a phone call and this script, and I read the script and I couldn't understand it. And I never, have or will. But I read this script and I said, oh, I have to meet this man anyway, because I think he was brave. And so I went to meet Todd, and I turned up really looking like a hippie. My hair was right about that length, and I had all these sandals on and stuff. And I met Todd, and he was dressed similarly the same way. So and I clicked in, I sat down, and I started talking to him. And I wasn't talking to him in the way as, oh, I'm interested in doing the job. I was talking to him because I thought he was fascinating. And then I left to do a film in England, and maybe 2 months later, he turned up in England because he was casting and shooting in England, and he said, would you come along for a drink just as his friend and stuff like that? And I spoke to him, he said, would you put this on tape for me? And I said, yeah. And 2 weeks later, they offered me the role. So.
It's weird because not since Muriel's Wedding, I knew that I was going to be doing it. It's really weird, just kind of an innate.
The more I looked into it, the more I researched it, the more cohesive a movement it seemed. The more there was a lot of similar ideas circulating in the UK and in America, and at times independently of each other, until people like Bowie began to, adopt and befriend people like Iggy Pop and Lou Reed and incorporate some of their raw energy into the stuff that he was doing in England. So a story began to kind of make itself apparent, which changes the kinds of phrases that you see used. I noticed that journalists began describing it at the beginning as sort of outrageous and fantastic, and they were calling it T-Rextasy and stuff like that. And then it started to be, then the word decadent started to appear. By 1973, it was the decadent David Bowie, the decadent Roxy Music. There was definitely a sense that the whole journalistic articulation of what was happening was also creating its own narrative in a way, and perhaps its own doom. Like it wasn't something that could last, it was something that was going to have to peter out in a very dark way. And many of the artists, I think, took that as a cue and killed itself off. So it really did end pretty much by its own making.
I really discovered glam rock kind of after punk rock, which was Patti Smith and television around 1975 and 76, and these people were referring back a couple of years. The stuff that was happening in the UK really didn't affect me at the time. I was 12 years old. However, when I came into adolescence, the sexual content of glam rock certainly was something that was kind of a shining light compared to the kind of Ted Nugent, Styx, Rush, the bands that were happening, the bands that were playing stadiums at the time, didn't really speak to me at all. And so there was an element to glam rock that was very attractive.
My mum was a huge fan of them all, so growing up I would hear it around the house all the time. And yeah, like Tony, I listened to this music non-stop whilst we were making it. And I mean, Bowie's stuff is really phenomenal, and I would say now that Hunky Dory is certainly one of my favourite albums ever.
Well, I was born in '72, so I definitely did not have that experience. But now I feel as though I did. It's really weird because I can't, I dabbled in an interest in this type of music, but I really got into it because we were making the film. It was I was more than willing to just dive on into that pool. So I feel very protective of that time and very fond of that music and nostalgic in a way, even though I wasn't there.
I concentrated on the 90s and looked at kids in the 90s, and they weren't that dissimilar, and they still had the same hunger almost for a different type of liberation and a different type of 70s. And it's what I could connect, because the 60s was a really depressing, almost conventional time up until maybe the hippie movement, which was about love. And then the glam rock movement came in, which was not about love. They might have fooled themselves and thought it was about love, but it wasn't. It was about sex, drugs, rock and roll. And for the first time being free, for the first time feeling yourself, for the first time seeing yourself. And the 90s, I thought, is very much like that, because it entered from the 70s to the 80s, and it got really depressing and industrial again. And then it was boosted as the 90s came, and there's a new spring. And youth are, and it's a film about youth, but youth as it ages, and youth as it ages again and again and again. So the same circle will turn round and round and round and round.
The script was full of Bowie songs, and we approached Bowie and asked for 6 songs for the film, and he said no. And then I had my very dear friend Michael Stipe begging for at least one, please, just all the young dudes. And he said no again. And I think he felt that he may want to actually use some of that material for his own, for something he may be doing in the future as a kind of looking back at the period project. But you know what, ultimately, because Brian Slade evokes aspects of Bowie that are unavoidable to people who know that work. I think it was better that we didn't have David Bowie's songs in the film. That actually, it gives you the possibility to think of Brian Slade as our own creation a bit more. If he only sang Bowie's songs, it would just be too fixed. There'd be no other way of looking at it. In fact, he really is a compilation of a lot of different aspects of the British element of glam rock, as the Kurt character, who certainly draws from Iggy Pop, has a lot of Lou Reed in there and a lot of other things as well. And in many ways, they represent what was the distilled English element to glam and the American element to glam, that really, it was about a romance between those two things. Not a romance between Bowie and Iggy Pop. It was a romance between these very different instincts in popular music at that time, both of which were lashing out against the sort of peace, love, hippie movement. But it wasn't until they came together that glam rock really was possible.
Androgyny didn't fascinate me as much because I was always androgynous anyway, as a human being. And so, I mean, I think people were very confused, and it was great to enter that confusion. And it's like the character keeps his hand on the ball, and when he loses his hand on the ball, he loses everything. Because it's only when he's in control is he feeling comfortable. And nobody was in control. And so nobody actually felt comfortable, and nobody exactly, I don't think, knew what they were doing. They were doing something, and people were reacting to it in such a big way. And so it was like, oh, let's see how far we can ride this until it crashes. And it did, it crashed very hard. Both for Brian Slade and Mandy Slade and Kurt Wilde and Arthur. It all crashed because it was like it's such a fictional dream reality that it couldn't have lasted. It was impossible to do such.
Well, I think it could, there was, of course, a lot of mainstream knockoff bands in England, bands I didn't know as an American until I started to research the project, like Mud and the Rubettes and Shawadi Wadi, and bands that are pretty much disposable pop constructions. But it looked like it was about over, I think, when those bands were doing the most most vital work by 1975. But I think if you want to dig a little deeper, I think that definitely the androgyny, the ambivalence of the images, the ambiguity of the images, the androgyny, the bisexuality, were hard to hold on to. It's much easier to know, oh, that guy's gay, that guy is straight, than to actually have this flux of this fluidity. Is harder to define, harder to hang on to. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
Well, Andy Warhol used to do it, and he said, it was David Bowie, somebody said they'll dress up their friends and then see them as they are. And I think that was very much it, that he dressed himself in this amazing costume with this amazing makeup and was able to be as free as a bird. But only within that, because he could be really honest, because nobody could actually say, oh, I'm sorry, that's Brian Slade, and I don't like what you're doing, because it was Maxwell Demon, and if you don't like it, lump it.
I would never want to base any character on anybody anyway. So I think because it was a real time, the story is definitely influenced and had to be supported by the reality of that time as we know it in the 70s. But the essence of the story is there, and that's what I focused on. You kind of create and wash yourself with all of that stuff that really existed, but the thing that drives the story is what's on the page. So I didn't really feel as though I had to go and kind of find someone to become, because it was in the script, and that's the journey that I enjoy, exploring that. And it is inspired by real people from that time, certainly, but also I was looking at like La Chapelle photographs, which are like, because my character was very camp and brittle and kind of frank, and there are many kind of influences.
No, he's full of joy, and then the older character is very lonely, cynical and bitter. I think, Todd was looking for someone like that, and then I walked through the door, and he thought, look no further. And yeah, the impression that I do get with the scene with Tony, it is incredibly lonely. It is crying out for the past. We are two very sad souls in that section, but it is, as Todd was saying earlier, that's really the emotional part of the film. That's, it's great to look at rock stars, and I wish I could have got up there and done some stuff on stage and had orgies and taken drugs and things as well. But it is, my character is from the point of view of the fan, and I think most people will relate to that, and it's necessary to bring it down.
Christian and I were walking around one day and we just thought, man, if we weren't in this film, if we were other actors, we would be dying to, it's the type of film you'd be dying to be in. And I think the character of Arthur, he's not in the world, but he's on the periphery of it, and that's kind of his trip. He feels like he was really there, and it was something that people were clamoring to become a part of. That's why all those kids were dressing up like that and wearing the flares and trying to emulate these people who were really affecting them, and not just in a kind of...
It wasn't just the role, it was the whole thing together. I didn't actually look at the role and say, oh, this role is any more special than that role, or that role. It was the whole unit. It was sort of like, I couldn't understand it. I think that's why I did it, because I couldn't understand it. It was a challenge, real challenge.
Oh, I love Todd. He's so great. I think he's a genius, basically, but a very accessible one. He's a really lovely, lovely man. Very humble, very real, very normal, and very brilliant. He was great.
But more for, I think, some of the sort of political underpinnings of what was going on. In other words, that kind of androgyny, that kind of the blurring of the boundaries, I think is the most radical thing about it. And the thing that went away very quickly in the 80s, groups really redefined themselves quite distinctly as autonomous entities. There's the black subculture in America, and they're their own thing, and you don't mix white and black people in relationships, and then there's the gay people and the straight people and women. And the 70s were much more curious about what was on the other side, and I like that. I think that's a much more radical point of view, and not one that's easily sustainable in a society that likes to define us very, very rigidly.
And I mean, movies, it's about feeling. It's about going on a journey, and that's an emotional thing, and afterwards maybe an analytical, intellectual thing. But I think you can definitely sense the sensuality and the energy of something.
Well, it was different because I never sung live. I recorded it, and then I had to lip sync. So, I mean, if I had been able to be on stage, you know, singing with the guitar, it would have been much different. But it was amazing. And I saw one or two clips of the film, and it was amazing to see myself perform. And it was kind of like, oh wow, for just a few moments. But I haven't seen the whole film, so I don't know, you know, how the other scenes have gone. But it was amazing. It was amazing to record with people like Michael Stipe, and they brought in this amazing band and made up this super band of people, and it was wonderful. Yeah, made me feel like a rock star, which I of course I had to acquire to be, you know.
Sure. Well, all right. Thank you very much.